It's time to move back home. Poles who'd been living in the United Kingdom for years are packing up and moving back to Poland. But why? There are more than just some reasons: Brexit, rise in racist attacks, and better prospects back home. But the gist of it all is that the Poles who'd called Britain their home for so long are ready to say goodbye. Polish people still make up the largest migrant group in the United Kingdom, but the numbers haven't gone up substantially. Meanwhile, back in Poland, the government is asking Poles in Britain to come back, assuring them that things have changed. But have things really changed? What are the reasons that compelled so many people to move in the first place? And why are they deciding now to go back? If you're from the EU, Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, or Liechtenstein, you and your family might be able to apply to the EU settlement scheme to continue living in the UK. That's an expert talking from the government of the United Kingdom's official website. But to better explain the situation, the EU settlement scheme, who was eligible and who wasn't, and what it meant to be granted indefinite leave to remain, we have to go back in time. As most topics revolve around the socio-political and economic conditions of Great Britain we have to circle back to Brexit. Following the referendum held in June 2016, 51.89% of British nationals, a small majority but one nonetheless, voted in favour of leaving the European Union. They had their reasons. The Leave group had gained momentum over the past couple of years with calls for the government to pull out of the alliance and regain Britain's sovereignty. Naturally, there were other reasons too. Immigration and the EU fund would also be among the top three. But the case was clear and simple. The United Kingdom would start due process to leave the EU. But what does that have to do with Poland? You see, after the EU's expansion in 2004, Poland became a member of the alliance and, as such, was granted the many perks of being part of the EU. Namely, the Polish population could now travel freely into other EU member states, including the United Kingdom. There'd been a period where Polish workers hadn't been granted full rights to work in Britain, but eventually they got there. Slowly but surely, Polish Britons became the single largest immigrant group in the United Kingdom. Not all of this happened after 2004. According to a survey by the ONS from 2020 to 2021, there were 682,000 people of Polish birth living in the United Kingdom. A majority of the population resided in London. Southeast was a close second, followed by the Midlands. Polish Britons had moved to the United Kingdom several decades before. There'd even been 66 Poles on the famous Empire Windrush during the Windrush generation. A sizable portion also moved to the UK after the fall of the communist bloc. All in all, there were more reasons than just some for why Polish people wanted to move to Britain. However, if we were to summarize it, it was for a better life. At the time of the EU's 2004 expansion that saw Poland being integrated into the bloc, the country had to meet a set of rules. Essentially, the EU upholds the right to grant membership to countries to showcase a degree of law and order. Poland fit the bill, but just barely. Once free movement was in place, Polish people started moving out because life had just become increasingly hard for them back home. Corruption, political instability, and a fleeting job market, just some of the reasons why Polish people believed it was in their best interests to move. When they couldn't find work in their home country, they travelled elsewhere to find employment. In Great Britain, specifically Polish migrants were welcomed for taking up jobs in hospitality and farming, two of the UK's egregiously underemployed sectors. Coming back to the EUSS, once Britain had announced its decision to withdraw from the EU, it unequivocally announced its decision to end free movement. This meant that the migrants from member states who'd been living or working in the UK would have to go back. At least, that's what could have happened if the UK evoked Article 50 and opted for a no-deal divorce. It's not so many words. A no-deal divorce would have meant that the UK wiped its hands clean of the EU once and for all. Isn't that what they wanted? Well, not really, and the reason why the UK didn't formally leave the EU until 4 years later in 2020 proves it. Free movement was just one of the many perks of being part of the alliance. Another was the European single market. The UK wanted to negotiate the terms of its exit from the EU, ensuring there was no bad blood. That's a gross oversimplification, but it's what it all boiled down to. Anyway, because the UK and the EU were negotiating terms, the fact that Polish people had been residing in the UK since 2004 without contest came up. Till now, they didn't have to worry about applying for a British passport, and because of the EUSS, many of them never did. You see, the EUSS was an immigration regime of the UK introduced by the Home Office in 2019 under the new Appendix EU of the UK's immigration rules. Broadly, it granted nations of EU and EFTA states the opportunity to have indefinite leave to remain. The EUSS classified successful applicants into two categories: settled and pre-settled. Registrations began during the implementation period in January 2020 and would end by IP completion day at 11:00 p.m. on the 31st of December that same year. The Home Office later announced the statistics of the EUSS. Altogether, they'd received close to 7 million applications, and 89% of them, or around 6 million of them, had been granted. How many applications do you think the Home Office received from Poland? Close to 1.5 million applicants, second only to Romania. According to the Home Office Accession Monitoring Report, Polish migrants are spread out across the United Kingdom. Migrants would often bring their children with them, necessitating the need for the Polish Education Society. Now, these kids fared well in exams conducted in English, but they also had the option of taking their exams in Polish too, a fact that showcases just how integrated the Polish community in Britain used to be. Besides that, they've also held many esteemed positions in Britain. To name a few, John Zarnecki was the president of the Royal Astronomical Society, Leszek Kalakowski was the first winner of the John W. Klug Prize for Lifetime Achievement in the Humanities, and Sir John Gielgud was an actor whose career spanned over 8 decades. Polish Britons have also significantly impacted the healthcare sector, particularly as carers and support staff in the NHS. Their contributions have helped alleviate some of the pressures faced by the healthcare system, particularly during times of crisis such as the COVID-19 pandemic. Moreover, Polish entrepreneurs have set up businesses across the UK, contributing to the local economies through job creation and tax revenues. Not to mention the cultural enrichment, with Polish food, festivals, and cultural practices becoming more prominent in the UK. However, their contributions to the economy have gone unnoticed by certain racist groups. After mass migration in the 21st century, instances of racist attacks increased, reaching an all-time high. One statistic from 2007 shows there had been 42 racially motivated violent attacks committed against Poles. These numbers had increased from 28 in 2004 at the time of the EU expansion. Giles Corran's anti-Polish views found their way into the Times, where he expressed his negative sentiments against Poles. Corran used the term Polak to refer to the Polish diaspora in Britain, arguing that if Britain is not the land of milk and honey it appeared to them 3 or 4 years ago, then frankly they can clear off out of it. Several other instances followed, and these instances have only gone up after Brexit. So what happens when your contributions towards the economy aren't recognized and racially motivated attacks against your community have increased by tenfold? You leave. Arkady Żakocki, Poland's ambassador to the UK, offered advice to Polish Britons in 2019. Come home. This was during the implementation period and after the EUSS had been announced. Żakocki also called on Poles in the UK to consider returning to Poland, where he claimed that things had changed. This sparked a debate online, and Redditors discussed how Poles had started moving out of Britain following Brexit, hoping for a better life back home now after all these years. Some users commented on how construction businesses had taken great leaps in Poland over the past couple of years. Poles living in the UK would take up construction jobs, hoping for more pay. It'd be fair to say that the median income in Britain is greater than it is in Poland. But so is the cost of living. Coupled with the fact that many of these migrant workers would then have to send money back home, it just made more sense for them to pack up and leave. Plus, construction was a budding industry in Poland, with many projects in the government's pipeline. It was a simple case of following the money trail. This one just happened to lead them back home. Poland is changing. You have to remember that one wave of mass migration from Poland to the UK happened after the fall of the communist regime. It took Poland longer than what many Poles believed was necessary to catch up with the rest of the world. That, plus the fact that crime and corruption rates seemingly soared in the few years after communism ended, Poles had to move out to find a better life for themselves. Have crime and corruption rates gone down? In the years since the EU took in Poland in 2004, yes, the rates have gone down. Poland's membership in the European Union has led to greater cooperation with other EU nations in combating transnational crime, which has helped reduce certain criminal activities such as human trafficking and drug smuggling. Data from the Polish National Police and Eurostat indicate a decrease in the rate of homicides and other violent crimes. The country's efforts to modernize its police force, improve crime detection, and implement more stringent legal measures have contributed to this trend. Corruption is still an issue, but there have been incentives by the government to combat the growing rates. Poland has made some progress in combating corruption, especially through legal reforms and greater transparency measures. The Polish government has introduced several anti-corruption initiatives, such as the Central Anti-Corruption Bureau and stricter laws aimed at public officials. The Corruption Perceptions Index by Transparency International ranks Poland in the mid-range among EU countries, indicating that while not rampant, corruption is still a concern. Housing affordability has become a significant reason for many Poles in Britain to consider moving back to Poland. The average house prices in the UK have surged, with London being one of the most expensive cities in the world for real estate. For many Polish immigrants, this has meant living in cramped, shared accommodations or in less desirable areas far from work and social opportunities. In contrast, Poland offers a much more affordable housing market. As Poland's economy has grown, so has the availability of modern affordable housing. Many Poles are finding that they can buy or build homes in Poland at a fraction of the cost of similar properties in the UK. Additionally, Poland's lower cost of living means that their earnings go further, enabling them to achieve a higher quality of life than they could in the UK. Polish culture places a high value on families, and the distance from loved ones often becomes a burden for those living abroad. Many Poles in the UK have left behind close family members, including elderly parents, siblings, and extended family. Despite the vibrant Polish communities that have developed in the UK, many Poles find it challenging to fully immerse themselves in British society while maintaining their cultural identity. Returning to Poland allows them to provide their children with an upbringing steeped in Polish culture, language, and values. But why do you think Poles are going back home?